Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Peirolo.
And I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
And we are at episode 73, which we are calling the Cut and Run Show.
Fast on your feet for this.
Yeah, well, I one of my favorite songs of all time is The Clash, Should I Stay or Should I Go?
Yeah.
And that's essentially what we're going to be examining today. Should I stay or should I go? And I believe, as I was thinking about this topic, I believe that there are kind of two broad camps of people. There is a camp that tends to cut and run too quickly, whether it's jobs or relationships or, pursuits. And then there's a group that tends to stay too long. They will hold on until the bitter end. Do you think that's true? And if so, which group are you in?
Absolutely not.
Okay, tell me more about that.
There's a third group, and that's the group that leaves right on time. And I'm laughing. Okay. But there have been instances in which, I know somebody who didn't get on a plane to Lockerbie, Scotland. They chose not to get on that plane. It's like, I don't have to rush. You know what? I'll just take the next one. And that plane crashed. There have been people who avoided going to work on the day that the World Trade Center got hit, and then also missed the tsunami in Banda Aceh by 2 days. And I'm personally obsessed with this. I call it right timeism. And if you're dialed in and especially sensitive, finger in the air, I think there is actually such a thing as the exact right time. If I'm guilty of anything, it's obsessing about what that right time is. And if you obsess over it, sometimes you leave too soon, and then sometimes you leave too late. But in general, if you're really focused on the right time, you can intuit when that is. So that's my take.
All right. I like that. I like that third camp, but just for the purposes of discussion, assuming for a moment that there is that third camp, for the rest of us that are in, tend to have a preponderance to stay a little longer than we should, or, leave too quickly. Do you feel like you go towards one of those poles?
Yeah, this came up recently too, because, people were like, how long were you at Ozzy? 10 years. And believe me, I would have left Ozzy if ever an opportunity to do so, had a credible opportunity to do so, had presented itself. But leaving for a lesser title, same salary, not going to work. Leaving for lesser title, lesser salary, not going to work. Leaving for a lesser title, more salary, but possibly more unstable environment, that wasn't going to work either. So, did I stay too long? I stayed there as long as they asked Abe Lincoln at one point, purportedly asked Abe Lincoln, how long should a man's legs be? I don't know why people are wasting the president's time with this kind of stuff, but he kind of thought for a second. He goes, as long as they need to be to reach the floor. So I have no idea if any of that is true, but in general, I don't think I'm more deathly afraid of getting the wrong time. And I'm deathly afraid of making hasty decisions. So if I'm going to err in any direction, if I can't get the right time, I would rather stay longer, just to make sure.
And the reason I was thinking about this is my Substack last week was about this, what I call the potential trap, right? One of the things that I mentioned is I tend to stay too long. Right. In jobs, in relationships, in, friend groups, community, because I see the potential. Right. So the potential trap is when I look at a job or a person or an organization and think, wow, I see so much potential here. We could be so great together if they just do.
You're a visionary. In other words, you see things that aren't there.
Which is also called delusional. And it's a real trap for me. And I think others, I don't think I'm alone in this. I sometimes want something for an individual or a work team that they don't actually want for themselves.
Yeah.
Right. I've been brought into many jobs where I have said, hey, here's the potential that I see for this company or this team. Here's what I would do to have that potential happen. And they're all excited about it. They hire me. Yay, go get them. And then when it comes to the reality that in order to evolve, you need to change, you might need to let go of certain things that no longer serve you. You might not have the right people in these positions, then they balk. It's like, no, we don't actually want to change. We don't want to make hard decisions. We don't want to do more work. We're pretty comfortable with where it is. And then, of course, I become the irritant, right? I become the one who is challenging, who is saying, you need to, if you want to evolve, you have to do these things. And so I feel like I've ended up staying in situations where I should have seen the writing on the wall. And I should have recognized these people are never going to change. They have a vague desire for improvement, but absolutely no commitment to doing what is required to have that improvement.
It's an expression that comes to mind. It's about trying to push a rope. You can roll it, you can drag it, but you cannot effectively push a rope. And I remember A.C. Thompson, who's written a couple of great books and was working on Frontline for a long time after having embedded himself in Afghanistan. At one point, he said to me in a personal conversation, we were just, shooting the shit. And he said, there's a finite amount of time that we have on this planet. And if I have to choose how I want to spend my time, I'm not going to do it spending it doing anything that doesn't give me, that doesn't please me. And so, you and I don't know if you remember a friend of mine, Scott, who had been my roommate for a couple of years, he had the same kind of obsession, like, compulsory self-advancement. I'm going to make you better because I can see that. And he was an engineer initially in life. He is now a professor. And he would go into these, environments that had been cast iron. Like they had been doing what they're doing as they've been doing it. This is at General Motors. He had worked there for years. And he was just like, you guys are nuts. This is really stupid. Let's change. And he beat his head in like maybe 3 years against the wall trying to get horse meat water. And it failed so miserably that he decided, I'm going to become an expat. He moved to France and has never returned. So he gave them all the time that he thought they needed before he decided, I need to go in another way with my life. So I find it's really not very helpful to try to force people to do that which they don't want to do, or that which they don't naturally find themselves doing. It's pointless.
So that's the first point. If you are deciding if you should stay or if you should go, one of the things to look at is the circumstance in which you find yourself one where you think change is possible, right? Yeah. I mean, if it's not going to change, then, like I remember talking to, and I've had this conversation more than once with a close friend who was trying to decide whether or not to leave her husband. Mm-hmm. And I said,
I would say,
but I said to her, if we are talking in a year and absolutely nothing has changed, will you still want to be there? And she's like, absolutely not. I mean, in order for me to stay, he has to change these pretty major things about how he moves through the world. And I was like, well, then that's the answer, right? If you can't be with this person substantially as they are, then you don't have some idea that a person's going to change.
Yeah, right? That's a mug's game. Trying to get somebody, forget it, push the rope.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, particularly women, fall prey to this. Like, well, this person has all of these great qualities. Again, it's the potential trap, right? And I'm sure that I can convince them to stop smoking, drink less, like fill in the thing here. And my experience is people rarely change.
Yeah. This is the weird thing. I remember I went through this phase and it was on the occasion of something you're well familiar with. I went through this phase of going to high school and college reunions. And I remember being so depressed after one of them because, again, in retrospect, I'm thinking, there was so much promise here. This person could have done this, and they could have done that. And now they're just some functionary working at the DMV. I mean, there's nothing shameful about the DMV, but I just expect, and then I was like feeling this kind of reflexive nostalgia for who it is I thought they were, for our lost youth, our past youth. And then I realized I had it was a road to Damascus moment where I sat up and I thought, no. Don't be an ass. They are exactly who they were destined to be. So, Freud had a grandson or possibly a great grandson that I went to high school with. And he ended up working in the DMV. I mean, he's passed on at this point a couple of years ago. And I remember he was such a bright guy. And I didn't discover Freud, the psychoanalyst, was his great grandfather until much later. But he did a great job at the DMV. He really liked the DMV. He did nothing but the DMV after he got out of the college, and he rose through the ranks at a pretty significant position. But I was like, Freud's grandson, DMV. Why would I feel bad about that? That was me being a snob, perfectly okay. And I stopped feeling this kind of reflexive nostalgia for who people could be and took them as they were,
Well, there's also you're also making an assumption that the sum total of, I don't think you're making this assumption, but I want to correct it for anyone who's listening who think you might be. We don't want to make an assumption that someone's attainment of status or job or fame is actually like the sum total of their life, right? Like that man may very well have had a loving family, children who he raised in a wonderful, nurturing environment, who went on to do the same to their children. So the idea of like, when we look at our life in total and our accomplishments, we do ourselves a disservice thinking that we're only going to judge ourselves or be judged on our accomplishments in terms of work and career and finance.
Right. And to be fair, the only reason I thought about him and singled him out is because he was so deliciously arrogant when we went to high school. so it was a delta between how he envisioned himself initially, which I bought into, and then what later he became. But yeah, there was a process. Yeah. Right. So anyway.
Well, and if you're thinking about whether or not to leave a situation, I mean, I just published a book on making life decisions, The Saint and the Drunk. And one of the sections that I have in the book is to invite people to look at the narratives that they have. And I have a whole chapter on quitting, quote unquote, right? Like, what is your narrative in your family, in your culture? Just what do you carry in your own head about people who leave? Is someone who leaves a job, a career, a marriage, a town, are they a quitter who quits? Or are they a person who is evolving and exploring new opportunities? And what I found in going through this content with people is there are a lot of people, and in my small sample size, particularly men, who feel like, I went to law school. If I don't practice law, I am quitting, and I have wasted all of the money and time and energy that I spent on law school. I am a quitter, as opposed to reframing the narrative to say, I tried something, it didn't work for me. I am now evolving and moving on to a new opportunity. So does that resonate for you? Like, do you have narratives around stopping something that are helpful or not helpful?
No, I mean, somebody recently asked me in the interview about a cycle. They said, do I understand my involvement with music? Is my understanding cyclical? That now that I'm singing a standards record, does that take me back to when I stopped doing hardcore to sing another type of music? And I said, sorry, I'd like to help you with your narrative, but I don't think it's cycles. My progression is much more linear, and so I'm not obsessed with quitting. You're right. Like if somebody says, like, for example, I found it extremely hard to leave a good job for clearly a better job. I had a good job at Nikon Precision, and I got a much better job at Apple. And I remember feeling like really conflicted, so conflicted that the first day at the job at Apple, as I'm driving to Apple, I'm thinking I could turn around and go back to Nikon, and I know they would give me my job back. But I had to grab fortune and go ahead and do what I did, which was to accept show up for work at Apple. So I didn't. It was tough to go in and tell them, hey, I'm leaving, because I really liked the people at Nikon, but I never at any point felt like I quit on them. They asked for 3 years. I dutifully gave them 3 years. And having turned down other jobs that weren't as cool as Apple, but maybe cooler than Nikon, so I fulfilled my obligation. I did what any human could healthily possibly have done to improve the lives of the people around me before I decided to leave. And in every situation, I'd like to make that. I'd like to imagine that I could make that claim, that there's not somebody sitting around going, you dumbass, if you'd just given us 6 months. Now, I have friends who did that, who have backed out of companies that then went on to, the other owners ended up making 70 mil a piece. Guys like that haunts me. That haunts me. And that guy would clearly say, yeah, I left too soon. I don't think there's anything that I'm thinking about that I've left too soon. Not at all. And I think that, and I don't think about quitting. Quitting doesn't inform my understanding of soon versus now versus later. Even if you leave too early, I mean, what I consider quitting. I'm like a Vince Lombardi guy. What I consider quitting is in the face of difficulties, you fold. That's quitting.
Got it. And see, that's your narrative around quitting, right?
Yep.
And that if you choose to leave when you have fulfilled what you said you would do, that is leaving, not quitting. And so if you're listening to this and you're considering, should I stay or should I go? That's a great one. Like, what are your narratives around leaving, quitting, changing, and be clear about that. Another one is, I do think we need to look at the practical implications, right? So both of us have stayed at difficult jobs for reasons. You talked about your reasons for staying at Ozzy. I have stayed at jobs where I have been actively sexually harassed because at the time I needed the money and the health insurance. There are lots of people that stay in bad jobs, bad relationships, bad circumstances for very real financial reasons. And I'm not trying to tell anyone that is bad, right? And I do think we need to look at the practical reality of, leaving or changing and be like, is this going to impact my financial well-being in the short and long term in a way that I cannot recover from? Is this going to cut me off from health insurance or medical care, other benefits that are necessary for me and my children? So we do need to stay grounded in that. And then the next one, and you kind of mentioned this, is I have something that I call a 2-year rule, which is, if these are the last 2 years that I am alive, when I'm on my deathbed, am I going to be happy that I spent these 2 years in this way?
Yeah, and that's a crucial calculus because there's not a lot. That really puts it right back to where that I mentioned that, what A.C. Thompson was saying, which what time do I have left? Is this how I want to spend these scant 2 years? Yeah. So, I'm smiling a little bit because when you were talking about that, I was remembering when I was, anticipating asking for a divorce. And the first thing I did was to scout out places outside where I could sleep if everything turned against me. Like, culverts, drainage ditches, abandoned buildings, because I thought for sure that I'd be ruined. But, it seemed to make sense to me to get out of a difficult situation that you would do things that within the best of your ability vouchsafe your future existence. Right. So none of which I had to do. I was just being anticipatory about trouble. My ex-wife is great, so it never came to that. So
and I think the thing with the 2-year rule, I mean, I've been doing this. My dad died when he was in his 40s, and so I've never taken for granted that we get to have this long life. And the 2-year rule, I've been doing that pretty seriously for probably the last 15 years of my life. And it's worked out well for me in that I have been doing a job that I enjoy, being with people that I enjoy. There's very few circumstances where it's mostly a work transition for me. And I'm not suggesting that there haven't been 6-month, year-long periods where I was like, okay, don't love this part. But generally, I've been doing something that I feel like would be of value to me if these were my last years on Earth. However, I won't pretend that there wasn't a cost to that financially. I haven't made as much money as I could have made had I stayed in those soul-sucking jobs. And so I want to acknowledge that, there are consequences to our choices. That's a choice that I was willing to make. But again, not everybody is going to be able to be in the circumstances to make that, right? And then I think another point is to really look at your values. Right. So Eugene, just made a really good point, which is that to you, quitting is stopping because something is difficult.
Yep.
Whereas leaving is something where you have discharged your obligations and can move on. And I think for a lot of people, it's useful to think of what are the moral and ethical implications here. And often they can be quite complex.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the father of my children decided that to live his best life, he needed to leave the United States and go and live in Europe with his now wife. Valid decision. You can see how that would be something that, motivates a person. However, he saw his kids twice a year.
Yeah.
And there are consequences of those choices, and there are implications for that. Everybody makes their own decision, but recognizing the fact that our decisions impact the people around us. Yep. And there are some things you can't get back, like people who decide I'm going to go away from my children because I want to pursue a dream. That's a valid choice. You don't get that time back from your kids. And it's disingenuous to expect that, well, when they're adults, we'll spend time together, because chances are they're not going to want to hang out with you when they are adults.
Was this song by E40? Everybody's got choices,
right?
It's a weird thing. Quitting, leaving, staying. All of these things tend to. It is. I start to think, people have asked me repeatedly over the last few years, what is your biggest mistake, biggest regret, mistake? And I said, I'm not big on regret, mistake, but I always come back to the same one. And the same one is, I should never have left Apple to go to Adobe. And people who are not in the Silicon Valley kind of laugh at that. It just is the same. I mean, what do you give a crap? What's widget company A versus widget company B? And of course, everybody who works at Apple has got an inflated sense of self and self-importance. But I think that I was so unhappy at Adobe, it made no sense to me. And they did a survey. Some university had done this survey, and they talked about people from Ivy League schools, and they tracked them at 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years out. And they wanted to track happiness, satisfaction, life, general, not just professional, personal. And they said, well, who did better? Legacy kids, kids of kids of professors, athletes, or all the different groupings that you can buy. High income kids, low income kids, middle class kids, and they found one group stood out heads and shoulders above others in terms of 5-year happiness rates, 10, 15, 20, and it was interestingly enough the athletes. And so people are like, what? Because it's never held that the football players in any school are the brightest ones. Well, how is this? And they said, well, what they thought was useful was that sports put you in a position to, in a very controlled way, deal with failure constantly. Every game. Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. And you learn about losing, what you have to do to not lose aggressively, how to bounce back from a loss, and how to just keep it moving. And I just thought that was really super compelling. I mean, all of my kids are all athletes, and I think I can see it work through them. It actually helps, so.
And so is the idea then that by being conditioned to accept failure, understand failure, metabolize the disappointment that comes with that, you are better able to just go through life with its inevitable failures? Is that the idea?
Yeah, they don't, I mean, they knock you off kilter, but they don't knock you down. And I mean, that's it. I was at Adobe for as long as I could be. I stayed at Adobe until they killed the group. They were going to make Adobe.com a destination site because everybody was talking about blogs. And about a year and a half, maybe 2 years in, they realized, hey, people are reading, but they're not buying our products as a result of it. So why don't we just turn it back to a product site? And that's what they did. They fired all the real world journalists with the exception of one or two. And that was the end of that. But I stayed there for the entirety of the ride, hating every minute of it.
Well, and I think you make a good point, which is that the question of should I stay or should I go is often decided for us.
Right.
right?
Right.
Like we get laid off, we get fired, the division is closed, the person we are married to asks for a divorce, even if we didn't see it coming. And
Yeah.
that is true. And I think, it's interesting, that notion of loss and failure. Cause I mean, I certainly played, I played sports throughout high school and then,
Mhm.
not really beyond. But I feel like I've had so much failure in my life
Mhm.
between, like the thousands of rejection letters that I've gotten for my writing or trying to get an agent, all the articles that I never hear back from anybody from, just really big failures at work, right? Like getting
Mhm.
fired, the company, like there's just been so many things and they're always disappointing, but I don't quit from them. I mean,
Yep.
I'm like, I just take a licking and keep on ticking, to go through,
Yep.
old advertising things, the Energizer Bunny, like whatever the
Yep.
analogy. And it's not that those failures or those losses or those things that don't go my way don't have an emotional impact. But
Mhm.
generally, I try to learn from them. Okay. How do I
Yep.
never do this again? And what do I know now? And then move on and do another thing,
Yep.
which is, I think does build resilience.
Yep.
So yeah, that's interesting. And I
Yeah, well,
think,
it's funny.
yeah,
It was funny because I just, I moved from America to Spain. So I took stuff. I got to California in 1980 and I left in 2025. So I took stuff that I've collected and I'm a pack rat. And every rejection letter I have, every box, every attempt to scuttle me out of a job. I remember I was at corporate computing and they tried to create some kind of, even though I'd like won an award for them, they tried to fabricate some getting rid of me at cost because they were trying to sell the magazine, which now I recognize as a pattern. And I fought aggressively back. And then, of course, when they realized that they were just going to fold the magazine and not sell it, they rescinded all that stuff and apologized. And then, of course, I saved all that and it was great moving, trying to decide, do I throw this out? Do I keep it? And yeah, it's in Spain with me now, because I like to I remember a subsequent magazine to corporate computing. I won an award at the Folio Magazine Awards in back east in New York, I believe, and it was great walking by the table with the guys who tried to scuttle my career with the big New Magazine of the Year award. I said, "Hey, you guys," and went back to my table.
well, and there's also it's
Yeah.
funny because you and I, I think we went together to our 5-year Stanford reunion.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and it's funny because I remember this was years ago, having a conversation, maybe like, 10 years ago, not that long, having a conversation with you about going to those types of events.
Yeah.
And that there is the satisfaction that you said of like somebody who was difficult or somebody who was arrogant. And there's also just the vanity of like showing up
Yeah.
and seeing that others have not aged as well as you have.
Yeah, of course, of
That
course.
our
That's why.
mutual commitments to fitness were not shared by all of
Right,
our
right.
classmates.
Well, that's why we have the book, the guide that they send you that
Yeah.
free reunion, and I fill that out every time they send it for me to fill out because I just want I just won't let it go.
I know. It's true. So
Yeah.
the last point I want to make is, if you are making a decision about whether to stay or go, is don't expect that everyone around you is going to approve of whatever it is that you decide, particularly if they're impacted. Right. And
Yeah.
I do think it is important. We're in this universe where social media has so much cultural clout that
Mhm.
we do want approval. We do want a reaction, and recognizing that you can make a decision that is right for you, that aligns with your morals. And a lot of people can still think it's a bad idea and have all sorts of energy towards you and anger. And, like everybody's got an opinion on stuff, and to
Yeah.
recognize that's not what's important. And the reason I think about that in terms of social media is, it's the beginning of the year. I'm doing my social media calendar, and this is something you've told me a bunch of times, but it's finally like landing for me, is I don't have
Mhm.
huge followings,
Mhm.
and neither do we, as for Bad Boss Brief, but man, they're dedicated.
Yep.
And, something that I thought of is like, and I saw this on social media, if let's say we probably have 300 people that will
Mhm.
listen to this or participate with our content. And there are other people and other podcasts that have way more. But the
Mhm.
reality is, if we had 300 people in front of a room, like I'd be like, that's a good book reading. I would get in my car and drive across the state to go to a book reading where 300 people showed up.
And Chuck Dukowski from used to be the bass player in Black Flag told me once, and it's really informed my understanding of everything. He said, you don't ever complain about there being scant audience. He said, it's not the fault of the 5 people who show up that nobody else showed up. So you kill yourself for 5 people as easily as you would for 5,000 or 50,000. Right. And I like that attitude. I mean, I've been doing the Show Stomper in some version. It used to be called Knuckle Up since 2007. In advance of my fight book, everything you want to know about asking game, refrigerator, asking for asking. And who knows how many people listen to it, but the people who listen to it listen deeply. And this is what I tried to get across at Ozzy. I would rather have scant organic growth than crappy fake Filipino click farm growth that means nothing. That's surface. So,
but I think also like we don't have 5 people. Like 300 people is a lot of people, right?
Yeah,
200 people is a lot of people. And so that was just a useful reframe again of like, what is success? What is whatever. So, all right, that's what we have time for our first show of 2026. If you have ideas about other topics you'd like us to cover, if you just want some advice, you have something to say, WTF at badbossbrief.com. I read every single one and we'll get back to you. And, we'd love to hear what you have to say and what you'd like to see from us in the coming year. So that's all we got. Thanks, everybody.
Adios.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief podcast with your host, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo. You can check out more of their work by visiting speirolo.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's the number 3, on Insta. Reach out with your questions, concerns, work case situations, or suggestions to us at WTF@badbossbrief.com. Stephanie will personally answer every single submission. Be sure to join us at badbossbrief.substack.com every other Wednesday for new episodes of Bad Boss Brief so you can gain further insights into your workplace environments. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.